for Bitcoin?
Well, I think there's a lot of concerns recently about Bitcoin being off its highs. I think it's a really healthy consolidation. And at the same time, I don't think investors have fled blockchain. You know, I think we sent some materials over to show you the different sort of token sizes. And the mid caps have almost tripled in the same time that Bitcoin's consolidated. So I think it's a really healthy rotation taking place.
So where do you see Bitcoin going? And do you think that is the coin that will have the greatest return in 2018?
Well, number one, I think the use case for Bitcoin hasn't changed. It's a store of value, and it's, you know, that and Ethereum are the blue chip names out there today. And so I think Bitcoin still has really bright prospects. I mean, we think it's going to be at least 20,000 by middle of this year, and probably more than double that by the end of the year.
More than double current levels, or more than double the 20,000?
I think both. I think Bitcoin is still growing its wallets, which is justifying an increase in the network value. But in terms of, you know, if we look at the 50 largest tokens, I think many of those are going to, you know, do significantly better than that. So I think Bitcoin still is a great portfolio diversification for investors, but I think this is the year where you see a lot of altcoins continue to break out.
So I'm going to go back to the question that I asked, which is, so of all the coins, which coins do you see having the greatest return in 2018? Well,
so we have to be a little careful because we're treating these like recommendations. So we've only formally written about Bitcoin, but we've, you know, we are tracking over 700 tokens in our database, and that's how we're compiling these indices.
Right.
And we're tracking a lot of internal momentum, advanced decline. So we have a very structured view of what we're seeing out there. But again, I just have to be careful what we talk about.
Okay. So we talked to one of the creators of Ethereum the other night on Fast Money, and he was talking about the uses for the Ethereum platform, that a lot of fintech, for instance, a lot of companies out there are actually building things on the Ethereum platform, that it's got a utility backing the value of the coin. Does that matter? I mean, what is Bitcoin's utility? Is Ethereum superior to Bitcoin because it has that functional utility versus being a store of value?
I mean, there's a lot of fundamental differences between the two because, you know, Bitcoin has a money supply, so it's a fixed number of tokens and it's proof of work, and Ethereum could be proof of stake. I think it's a lot like GSM and CDMA. So back in the early wireless days, GSM was the universal cellular system, but it was very simple. It was TDMA based. Qualcomm developed a much more complicated platform, which ultimately ended up being really robust. I think Ethereum is a really amazing platform, but it's extremely difficult to program for. So I think there's room for both.
Tom, so I think earlier in the fall you talked about obviously allocating a certain percentage of investable capital to this space. Where does Bitcoin fit in your total allocation? Has that changed a bit because you're expecting lower returns? Like if you were to just say that if you were somebody at home and you're going to put money into it, what percentage of it should be Bitcoin?
Well, I think for an investor who's new to the space, Bitcoin and Ethereum should be the bulk of their allocation because they're blue chip names and they're going to get institutional support. Let's not forget, the only futures you can buy are Bitcoin. But for those who have spent some time, and I think, you know, if someone dedicates time, they're going to find a lot of opportunities. And if they're a lot more flexible, then, of course, their percentage to Bitcoin and Ethereum, even to the top 10, should be a lot smaller. So I think it's really going to be an evolution of the risk appetite of the investor.
But the bottom line is that you think still that Bitcoin will be the best performing, Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum will be the best performing assets for 2018.
Yeah, so let's say that they represent 60% of the blockchain capitalization. So I think blockchain will easily beat equities this year.
Easily, okay.
But I also think Bitcoin and Ethereum individually will beat equities this year. So that means the aggregate blockchain should do a lot better.